Last 2 days. Wonderful man, you guys can relax, you can chat, and you can ask your questions when you're ready. So Graham is a soil scientist, agriculture consultant, director of BioAgriNomics. And BioAgriNomics is an independent agriculture and fertiliser advisory company focusing on linking soil conditioning, soil function, soil nutrition, animal nutrition, farm productivity, and a farm's environmental footprint. He does use smart fertilizers and smart farm management practices. Graham has worked in the soil science for 27 years in a government research institute in New Zealand, and as an independent consultant since 2004. Graham is one of the foremost authorities in New Zealand on dynamics of soil organic matter and the pastoral cropping systems, and the interrelationship between physical, chemical, and biological, quality of soils, and farm performance and profitability. Okay. So Graham, you can try the mark again, and you can see how you turn right.
I think I'll overtake the mic, if that's okay. It sounded terrible.
Do you want to have a try at the mic?
You can give it a go.
Just frown like you did just now at the back end on the working.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank Philip and Marlene and Portia and Craig for their kind invitation to me. It's very special. As a boy, I grew up listening to the All Blacks play the Springboks and huddled around prior to the television era, huddled around a radio on a very special occasion. But first of all, if I can have your permission to take a photograph of the group, because my wife is hard-pressed to understand why intelligent people of sound mind would voluntarily come and listen to me. If you can be so gracious as to let me prove to her that there is a group who are prepared to do that. So thank you very much.
Also,
the soil, and by definition, can be likened to a three-legged stool. And one of the reasons why I personally find throughout the world that a lot of farms are dropping the ball for reason that one or more of those three legs are actually cut short. And usually what I find is the one that's cut short is the biological. And the chemical one is extended because of the high application rate of nutrients significantly. As a result, that stool becomes unstable, it tips, and they drop the ball. Very, very, very common. So one of the things I want to exemplify this morning is the importance of the biological to try and balance that stool. The soil is, and you've probably seen a lot of this, it's a triune. It's chemical, physical, and biological. And to the soil scientists, we sort of grimace because a lot of the fertiliser companies do not attend to that particular component, the biological. And it's nothing new. Vasily Korotkov, back in 1860, 1870, defined the soil as including organic carbon and soil microbes. The biological is nothing new. It's always been as part of central soil science. But we, in terms of, as I mentioned, agricultural companies and fertiliser consultants and whatever, often don't pay cognizance to that component. Arguably, it is the most important of those three components because it regulates the other two.
Can everybody hear that? You're all happy?
No worries. Good. Farmers by and large are facing, and this applies worldwide, are facing debt levels that are going up astronomically. In New Zealand, that curve is actually steeper. Begs the question, why are their debt levels increasing markedly? It has a lot to do with the high application rate of nutrients that they don't require, and we'll get onto this shortly. This is quite a famous photograph of a situation. It's a Canadian piece of work where the difference between your gross margin and your net margin is increasing over time. And probably thinking about your operation, you can identify with the huge increasing difference between your net margin and your gross margin. So we have a lot of people clipping the ticket in agriculture. Also, their cost structure is going up quite markedly. But importantly, over time, farmers are not actually, their profitability is being compromised quite significantly. So what I'd like to do is to address the natural pathways of nitrogen. And because a lot of our farmers back home in New Zealand and Australia are being encouraged to apply a huge amount of nitrogen at significant cost to them, when you look at the natural supply pathways of nitrogen, you sort of wonder, are they being given the correct information? So initially, 380 kgs of N per hectare can come from the clover nodule fixation. Now it begs the question, to achieve that, we need to have good nodule fixation, and we can achieve that quite quickly. 32 to 38 can come from the decomposition of earthworms. They contain quite a bit of N in their system. 300, greater than 300, can come from the mineralization of organic bound nitrogen. Most of our nitrogen and phosphorus in particular is organically bound, and it begs the question, how can we release that organically bound nitrogen and phosphorus to the betterment of the farm operation? So those top three, add them up and you've got in excess of 700 kgs of N per hectare coming on annually, much more than a high producing dairy farm ever would need. Then we go on to these other ones. A significant amount comes from these free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. More come from the ammonia-oxidizing archaea, which are mineralizing ammonia. And this is a particularly interesting one, the associative diazotrophs. They have an incredible ability to take that 78% nitrogen in the atmosphere, which equates to 78,000 tonnes of nitrogen per hectare. And it's free nitrogen. So the key is, how can you as farmers utilise that free nitrogen? How can you draw down all that nitrogen in the atmosphere into the soil? So just bear that in mind, you've got 78,000 tonnes of nitrogen, huge amount. But because of the management and the advice given to farmers, they're not actually able to utilise all that nitrogen present in the atmosphere. So all we have to do is to activate those particular microbes. We need to increase their biomass, but most importantly, we need to activate their composition. Let's grab some water. So we're looking at Clostridium, Azotobacter. I don't have time to go through these in detail. The archaea and this important associative isotroph. And I want to exemplify the benefit of this particular guy here, the diazotrophs, in terms of this particular property. And some of you may already have seen this work by the University of Sydney and also Christine Jones, who sent me this particular photograph, where this particular property was initially farmed by the farmer and split into two eventually for two brothers, where Barry Zeiss farmed conventionally, and he had 3.7 stock units per hectare using conventional stocking systems, applying conventional phosphatic applications and fertiliser. I don't want to go into the detail there. When his brother Colin Zeiss did things a little differently 10 years ago, but where his stocking rate was almost twice, he applied what he called biological fertilisers. But significantly, this particular management practice generated 2,200 tonnes more nitrogen per hectare per year than his brother farming conventionally. 2,200 tonnes, it's unbelievable. But that figure was actually measured by Peter Ant at the University of Sydney. So it begs the question, how come this particular guy is generating all this nitrogen where his brother wasn't? This is a client of mine in the southern part of the North Island, where that debt level photograph that I showed you, he got to a point where he was absolutely despairing that he wasn't making any money. So he gave me a call and I went down and I said, take your urea silo away. Immediately saved him $22,000 by doing that. His farming neighbours and the industry said he would go out of business. He's now making a whole lot more money than he ever did. But we did a number of things. One was we turned his very effluent pond into an incredibly good source of nitrogen and phosphorus. And he was generating sufficient volume of effluent that we could then spread it using foliar application onto the property and gave him all the nitrogen that he required. To do that, we just activated the microbes in the effluent pond. So we put a biological activator in there. We did a number of other things like we brought the pH of the pond up to 7.4. At that particular point, it encourages microbial activity, and we got rid of the odour completely. But importantly, it converted the volatile nitrogen and phosphorus into non-volatile forms. As a result, he reduced his emissions from the pond by almost 70%. But that pond generated a real beneficial source of nitrogen. We also turned the sanitizing agent that he used in the dairy shed to a chlorine dioxide, which didn't destroy the microbes that we wanted to protect, where he was using a sodium, I forget the name of it, but anyway, it was a product that really decimated the microbes. So by going to the chlorine dioxide sanitizer, which we put through the lines and washed down the shed, it protected the microbes in the pond. We changed the amount and form of fertiliser that went on the property, and I'll get on to the use of smart fertilisers shortly. It's a big area, we'll have to brush over it. Fourthly, we increased the residual level of the grazing of the pasture, and I'll get on to this shortly. Lastly, we increased the performance of the clover in the pasture. And these are just some of the examples of the type of clover that is now growing on his fields, and they're also very effective at fixing nitrogen. And we'll go through this afternoon in the field how we can tell just how well those clover nodules are actually fixing nitrogen. So these are just some of the economic indicators of what's happened on that particular farm in the space of 2.5 years. His return on capital has increased from 2.9 to 5.2. The kilograms of dry matter per hectare per year has increased from 13.3 to 15.9. Bricks levels have increased from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, so there's a lot more energy going into the pasture. Percent clover has increased from 10 to 25%. The pasture conversion efficiency, the number of kgs of pasture required to produce a kg of milk solids. And they have increased from 13.9, so the amount of pasture eaten has decreased from 13.9 to 12.1. The protein-fat ratio has increased in time. Cost of producing a kg of milk solids, as you can see, it's decreased from $4.5 to $3.2. You multiply that by 9.5, I think, currently to give the rand. The kgs of milk solids per hectare per year, that increased significantly. kgs of milk solids per cow, 325 up to 385, and they are increasing. Percent empties, because we've tackled this high nitrogen application regime that he did have, his empty rates have come right back from 24 to 15, and they are dropping. Imagine that 24%, the cost to him of replacements is absolutely huge. It was. Somatic cell counts have dropped from 250,000, 300,000 down to 150 to 200,000. Condition score has increased a little bit. The kgs of urea applied, he was applying 135 kgs per hectare of urea. Now he's applying none. So you can imagine the cost benefit of doing that. And the spec costs per cow per annum have also dropped quite markedly from 71 to 45. So you can see the benefit to him in terms of the dollars that he's now making by making those transitions. This is another farm in a different part of the North Island where we have a conventional farm that is carbon negative. That is, he's losing soil carbon because of the management that's been applied, a very conventional farm. Relative to this regenerative carbon positive farm, he's sequestering soil carbon 5 kilometres away. And this particular farm is growing just under 12 tonnes of dry matter per hectare per year, where he's applying 235 kgs of nitrogen. And he's growing under 14 tonnes. 5 kilometres away, this particular farmer is growing 5 tonnes more nitrogen, 18.1 tonnes of nitrogen per hectare per year, and he's applying a fraction of the amount of nitrogen. This guy, 235 kgs, he's applying 13.5 kgs, and yet he's growing 5 tonnes more. Really interesting stuff. If we apply a lot of nitrogen, unfortunately, the plant takes it up, the crude protein levels increase, the nitrate nitrogen content increases. And as a result, the livestock is unable, the cow is unable to convert. It doesn't have the energy because they've knocked the sugars in the pasture. It is only able to convert 20% of the dry matter to milk, meat and fibre. A huge loss. And most of it is in terms of the ammonia, is 80%, and that goes into the atmosphere. So you have a very poor efficiency of conversion. And as a result of that high nitrogen buildup in the rumen of the animal, the concentration of nitrogen in the urine gets up to 1,000 to 1,200 kgs of effective nitrogen per hectare, which eventually goes into the waterway and groundwater and our lakes and rivers, which is not good in terms of what we want to achieve. So this is Lake Waikari in the north of Huntly, for those who are familiar with New Zealand. You can see the whole lake turned red for a reason that the amount of nitrogen increased 11 times, well above the World Health Organization levels, and the phosphorus increased 4.5 times. And the reason for that is primarily the high solubility of these particular products. A lot of our fertilisers that are applied are quite soluble. And as a result, because of their high solubility, they go straight into the waterway. Very little is actually taken up by the plant. The efficiency of uptake is quite low. Alternatively, what we want to do is look at other types of fertilisers, and as you can see, this is the only RPR that I'll have anything to do with from Peru, the Shishura. It has a good amount of quick release phosphorus and slow release. These particular ones here, the superphosphate, DAP and whatever, the phosphorus comes on and the nitrogen comes on really quickly. So what isn't taken up by the plant is either leached or it's fixed. So if we're looking at the fully or the partially reverted dicalcic phosphates, we have a good component of a slow and a quick release form of phosphorus in the system. But what we do as an industry, we are hell-bent on bringing out Band-Aids, which are nothing more than a clever business model to maintain the high application rate of some of these fertilisers that are causing a lot of our environmental issues. So what we want to do is, it's a lot smarter if we address the cause of the problem rather than looking at those things that mitigate the symptom. So looking at carbon sequestration, a lot of our issues can be resolved if we increase the amount of carbon in the soil. And using the BSA system, and I'll get onto this, and we'll do this in the field in terms of this afternoon, looking at how we can quickly assess whether our farm is carbon. In this particular case, this one here is carbon positive, that is it's increasing soil carbon. This particular dairy farm here is carbon neutral, and I use this term slightly differently to what is commonly published. Carbon neutral is where the carbon is in a steady state. It's an equilibrium, it's not being lost or gained. And carbon negative is where soil carbon is being lost. But we can, using the BSA system, quickly assess within 5-10 minutes what our situation is with the carbon. Now, in the handouts you have is a replication of this particular slide. I've given it as a handout because we don't have time to go through the detail that you've seen here. So please go to that at your leisure. But I do want to outline a number of aspects regarding the significance of what you're seeing here. If we increase soil carbon, it provides an important food source for our microbes. Really very significant. Provides a source of energy for the fungi, which is really major, and we'll get onto that shortly. It regulates most biological, physical and chemical properties, really important. It provides a reservoir, a food source of most plant nutrients, and if we look at this particular one, increasing its level increases the infiltration and the water holding capacity of the soil. Something that Phil mentioned before, which is what we want to increase. And I just wanted to draw your attention lastly to this sequestering of soil, significant amounts of carbon actually enables us to completely offset all our carbon emissions. We're not talking about farming emissions, we're talking about the total emissions. Everything. And if we look at this particular diagram here, I'm not going to go through the mass of how those figures were established. So suffice to say that in 1990, we supposedly were emitting 81.1 million tonnes equivalent of CO2. These are total emissions. Now, if we treat and sequester just 0.3 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year on 50% of our pastoral agricultural land, half of our land, we can completely offset that figure of 81.1 in the 1990 figures. Supposedly, the Department of the people in Wellington are saying that 656 million tonnes of CO2 equivalents are going to be emitted next year in 2020. If that is correct, looking at the maths, we can completely offset that 2020 emission figure by sequestering just 2.43 tonnes of carbon per hectare. Very doable in terms of smart farm management practices. And this is not, as I mentioned, farm emissions. These are our total emissions from vehicles, industry, whatever, power stations, everything. Just by treating half of our pastoral agricultural land. So pasture, good management on pasture is a very effective way of completely offsetting all our emissions. We don't have to retire part of our farm into forests, into pine trees or whatever. We can do it by grazing pasture. And this is just some of the work that we have done looking at the amount of soil carbon that has been sequestered under a particular carbon capturing land management system on a particular farm over 4 years. So in the 2009, the figure, the baseline was 107 kgs of carbon per hectare. And progressively went up 4 years later to 2013 to 132. So we had a 25 tonne of carbon increase over that period. That is only looking at the carbon sequestration in the top 600 millimetres of soil. We get a lot more carbon if we went down to a metre. So it's important to register to note where your starting point is and to progressively monitor the carbon levels. But you can do it easily just by grazing pasture. And I can tell you, you won't get there if you apply a lot of nitrogen. And you won't get there if you apply a lot of potassium and phosphorus, because of the deleterious effects those particular three elements have on soil microbes. So again, looking at this particular farm, the Zeiss, the Colin and Barry Zeiss situation, because of the differences in the management, we have half the amount of carbon that's been sequestered in that particular soil under the conventional relative to the regenerative farm management practice. Half the amount. Big difference. So soil carbon, soil life captures and holds on to nutrients. This is another aspect of the importance of what we're talking about. And again, getting back to a slide by Christian Jones that sent me, these are the percentage increases of the nutrients that occur in the Colin Zeiss paddock relative to his brother Barry, where here you're sequestering soil carbon, here you're not, and those are the increases, percentage increases in nutrients that are taking place for a reason no other than you're sequestering soil carbon. So how do we sequester soil carbon? How do we actually get there? What are the management options available to us to do that? Firstly, we need to promote the photosynthetic capacity of the soil. So we're looking at effectively the dry matter production, the solar panels that are present. The more solar panels, the greater the ability to actually capture the sunlight, to capture the carbon, turning the CO2 into sugars, which eventually go down into the root system. And the key is we need the microbes to then turn those active carbon fragments into stable long-chain soil carbon. But we need good dry matter production, we need good solar panels to be able to capture that. You as farmers are like farmers. It's as simple as that. So we need to increase the capacity of the soil to actually do that. Secondly, we need to increase the photosynthetic rate. The greater the rate of that process, the greater the rate of turning CO2 plus the water into sugars, within the oxygen of course, the more carbon we're going to sequester by a country mile. To do that, we need good soil structure, good soil aeration. We need good soil fertility, so the right form of nutrients need to be applied to the soil. We need good microbial biomass diversity, and most importantly, the activity of the microbes. And that's something that we do not take account of, and I'll get onto that shortly. And we need good soil moisture, good temperature levels, of course. Thirdly, maintain good residual levels. Don't overgraze. Grass grows grass. It's as simple as that. And if you graze too low, you defoliate the pasture, severely impinging on the ability of the grass to recover. Fourthly, promote the root system. This is quite a nice experiment done in North America, where they split rescue at three different heights. At a height of 12.5, 7.5 and 3.8. They did it every 4 weeks for 5 months. And as a control, they didn't touch it at all. You can see the difference that treatment has on the root depth. So obviously your carbon sequestration is going to be very high here. And as you progressively move to the right, as you progressively clip the shoots to a lower height, and affects the ability of that pasture to sequester carbon quite much. Develop the root density. You can imagine this particular profile here enables the sequestering of soil carbon much greater than soil quite bad for the plant, and you don't have the same root density or root mass forming there. Promote the soil structure and aeration. Major. This soil obviously enables the fine roots and the root system to develop, whereas very limited ability of this very tight soil to be able to do that. So don't take the risk. It's simply not worth it. The implications are quite significant. You can use, and this is in the visual soil assessment book, and I would encourage those who don't have it to pick up a copy, because you will need it this afternoon, as it provides a roadmap. You need the 3 comparative photographs to be able to score the individuals. But you can apply the worm test. If you just take a sample of the field moisture, field site, try and roll a worm. If you can roll a worm, such as we have here, 10 millimeters in diameter across by 40 millimeters long, without it cracking, you're actually too wet to graze. You're going to hug the ground. If on the other hand, in doing that process, it cracks quite badly, quite significantly, the soil is dry enough for the load bearing capacity of the soil to be high enough to take the weight of the heavyweight animal. And you can do that in a matter of 30 seconds. It works incredibly well, and it's very quick and very simple. And again, that is described in the book. For those who have a bit of paper, take a note of this website, Niles Olsen, soilkey@soilkey.com.au. That particular key, soil key, this particular equipment is incredibly effective at turning a compacted piece of ground that we have here into a well-aerated, well-structured piece of soil, whereby the root system and the plants can develop, increasing carbon sequestration. So go on to his site and you can read a whole lot more. Incredibly effective. And work done by Martin Stapper in New South Wales in Australia, who showed that